Incredible survival. Marfa Sobakina's touching journey to transform. After 15 days of shock, Marfa Sobakina stared at the crumpled letter in her hand, its words clawing at her heart like talons. The Council South decision to close the library echoed in her mind, blending with the whispers of young mothers who once found solace among the shelves. She was a guardian of dreams, yet her own dream seemed to unravel, leaving only despair in its wake. 5 days in a hospital bed had robbed her of control, and now her beloved library sat at a precipice, dangling over the abyss of oblivion. The heavy silence of her home felt oppressive. Shadows stretched across the walls, reminiscent of the stories that once danced there. She longed to cradle those tales again, but the reality loomed. The threat of closure had become a reality. Mrs. Jennings had always filled her with stories of worth and resilience, but without the library, what was she? A fading relic in a town nursing its wounds, with whispers of moving on crawling like vines in her thoughts. What if the only option left was to retreat into a mundane life, abandoning a place that had birthed her passion? She clenched her jaw, trying to suppress the rising anxiety. What would Mom do? The question slammed against her ribs. Mom's old box of memories lay untouched in the attic, a ghost she feared to summon. A flicker of determination spurred her up the stairs. She needed to find her roots, to anchor herself before the storm swept her away. The weathered box, now heavy with dust, cracked open like a shell. Photos, faces she barely recognized, smiled in sepia tone. Letters written in careful cursive unraveled tales of passion and purpose. Dreams turned to stone in the face of hardship. Suddenly, a knock pulled her from the reverie. Oliver, the art professor, stood in the doorway, his eyes sparkling with energy. Their chance meeting had ignited something within her, a hope that felt strange and foreign. "I heard about the library," he said, his voice a warm ember against the cold ache in her chest. She wanted to share the fire he lit, but she hesitated. "It's not just a building," she managed, "it's everything we are." But was it enough to combat the financial realities? Would a few dreams be enough to shield her from the looming wave? Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. Laughter bubbled between them as they discussed the possibilities of the library's revival, dreams intertwining like strands of color in a tapestry. But doubt crept back in, tainting the bright horizon. What would happen if he left? What if the heart of her vision crumbled while she sat tethered to failure? The excitement seemed like a cruel mirage, mocking her vulnerability as she felt the weight of expectations pressing down along her spine. Then came a letter, harsh and biting from her rival, unraveling her hopes and igniting fears that whispered of inadequacy. Now, the crumpled paper weighed heavily in her palm, accusations stinging like a bee's bite. There she stood, teetering on the edge, facing walls that suddenly felt alien, suffocating with uncertainty. Was it worth fighting back against the tide? Or was it time to step back, disappear like a whisper in the wind? The deadline loomed, and she felt her family's legacy hanging in the balance. Could she summon the courage to reclaim her voice and restore hope to a fading light? The air crackled with tension as she waited, lost between the brink of despair and the flicker of possibility. Marfa inhaled sharply, the stale air of her home clinging to her like a wet blanket as she grappled with the weight of the crumpled letter in her palm. It was more than just a document, it was an ultimatum, a stark reminder of her failure to secure funding for the library. As she paced the dimly lit living room, memories of laughter and shared stories between its walls flooded her mind. Each step felt heavier, burdened by regret, but an ember of determination flickered within her. She had to act. The council's decision was non-negotiable, but her fight was far from over. Marfa could not let her library, the heart of her community, her sanctuary, fade into oblivion. Her fingers danced over the photographs and letters in her mother's box, searching for inspiration, courage, and perhaps a path forward. Each faded image sparked a memory, igniting a sense of purpose that propelled her past the paralyzing fear that had held her hostage since the fateful meeting. Perhaps I don't need to fight for the library alone, she mused, the thought bringing a semblance of clarity. Oliver had shown her a glimpse of what collaboration could be, and though uncertainty lingered, it was a lifeline. She could gather allies, leverage their talents to breathe new life into the library. But how? The morning sun streamed through the window, illuminating the dust motes that danced in the light, and with it came a realization. Marfa could organize a community meeting to gather support. A forum where stories could be shared, where the library's impact could be realized by those who frequented its halls. It wouldn't just be about numbers, it would be about the human connections born among the pages, the inspiration they had ignited. Her heart raced at the thought of facing her peers and invoking the warmth of that shared space, but the fear of rejection clawed at her. What if they didn't care enough to help? What if the community she longed to rally had already moved on? Yet the words of Mrs. Jennings echoed in her mind, when you believe in something, you fight for it, even when the odds are against you. Marfa opened her laptop, her fingers flying over the keyboard. She crafted a heartfelt invitation, pouring her passion into each line. She positioned the email to send not only to familiar faces but also to those who had expressed interest in the library's future students, teachers, moms, and local artists. This was not just about her, it was about sparking a revival, igniting a communal flame. As she hit send, her pulse thrummed with adrenaline. She would not let fear dictate her actions anymore. Each moment of doubt that had plagued her began to peel away, revealing the resilience she had cultivated deep within herself through years of nurturing dreams. Days passed slowly as she awaited responses, each dawn appearing more hopeful than the last. But when the replies arrived, the initial thrill turned into a tumultuous swirl of emotions. Some supported her vision, their words full of encouragement and nostalgia. Others, however, were curt, dismissing her calls for unity with thinly veiled apathy. Marfa's heart clenched at the negativity, but with each unkind response, she also felt a growing resolve. This was merely a reflection of their unmet needs, not a measure of her worth. The true fight was not just for the library, it was for the acknowledgement that everyone craved connection through shared stories. The night before the meeting, as she stared at her reflection in the mirror, doubts crept back in. What if her efforts were in vain? Could she listen as her dreams tumbled down around her again? But just as the shadows of doubt encroached, she thought of her parents, a legacy of struggles turned into stories worth telling. In that moment, she committed herself fully, accepting that true growth often came through confronting adversity head-on. As the day of the meeting approached, Marfa felt a surge of anticipation mixed with fear. It was the moment to stand before her community, to reclaim not just the library, but her identity. Would the call she made resonate, igniting a collective spirit to save what mattered most? As she prepared for the presentation, her heart raced, teetering on the edge of both hope and anxiety. The air buzzed with energy as she stepped onto the stage that would ultimately shape her fate and the fate of the library. Would she rise to meet the challenge, or would she falter under the weight of expectations? The moment had come to share her vision, not just to save a building, but to rekindle a legacy. The moment Marfa stepped onto the stage, the familiar warmth of the library's wooden beams enveloped her, igniting her determination. The dimmed light spotlighted her figure, making her feel both exposed and empowered. She scanned the audience, faces familiar yet foreign with the weight of expectation hanging heavily in the air. Taking a deep breath, she started with a story, a memory of her first visit to the library when she was a child, her eyes wide with wonder at the row upon row of books. She painted a vivid picture of the characters she had met, the adventures she had lived, and the comfort of the library's embrace. The words flowed, unforced, as she translated her love for the library into an energy that resonated with the crowd. Yet, as she spoke, a flutter of doubt emerged in the back of her mind. Would they remember the joy it had once provided? Would they be stirred enough to invest in its future? That gnawing question threatened to derail her message, especially as she noticed a few disinterested expressions in the crowd, but Marfa pushed on, her voice steadying as she transitioned to a stark reality. The library is facing closure, not just financially, but in spirit. It doesn't just hold books, it embodies our shared memories, our collective identity. The words felt raw, her conviction was building with each syllable, but she knew this was not enough. She needed to do more than appeal to nostalgia, she needed a plan. As she unveiled her vision for revitalization, a glimmer of excitement began to flicker in her heart. Imagine a place where local authors share their stories, where children's laughter fills the children's corner, and where artists are inspired. Each room, each shelf, could hold the promise of new discoveries. She articulated specific ideas for programs that could thrive: a local author series, storytelling sessions, and art exhibits. Midway through, she noticed Oliver seated among the crowd, nodding encouragingly. His presence was a lighthouse amid the tumultuous waves of emotion crashing against her. He was a reminder that there were people who believed in the vision she shared, even if not everyone had yet grasped its importance. The challenge of the night was to confront those doubts head-on. After her presentation, she welcomed critiques and questions. As she navigated through differing opinions, some constructive, some harsh, each interaction revealed an underlying truth: her choices would shape not only the library's future but her own identity within the community. When the meeting concluded, Marfa felt a sense of fragility mixed with strength. She had taken a monumental step forward in her journey, not only as a guardian of the library but as a leader willing to embrace vulnerability. Emails and social media messages began pouring in, some with offers of support, while others were filled with skepticism. Yet Marfa knew that every response was a step toward discovering more about her own resilience. The disappointment of rejection would inevitably lead her to grow stronger, more astute in navigating the intricate dynamics of her community's needs, but as days turned into weeks, she found herself at a crossroads. Just when she had begun to envision a collaborative effort, a powerful opponent emerged: someone from the city council who staunchly opposed her initiatives. A vote to finalize the funding decision loomed, and Marfa had to confront this obstacle head-on. As she strategized ways to advocate for her cause before the council, an unsettling realization struck her: this fight was not merely about keeping the library alive, it was intricately tied to her own evolution. Would she summon the courage to challenge the opposition directly? Would she risk everything for a legacy that meant so much to her? Marfa steeled herself for the impending showdown, knowing the next meeting would not just test her plans but also her very resolve. The moment to face her antagonist was drawing near. Would she be able to rise to the occasion, or would she falter when it mattered most? The energy in the council chamber pulsated with an undercurrent of tension as Marfa took her place at the podium. She could feel the weight of her last few weeks pressing against her ribcage, an amalgamation of hope and worry that seemed to hang in the air, a physical entity she could almost touch. As the members of the council exchanged glances, Marfa wrestled with an overwhelming mix of assertiveness and vulnerability. Facing her opponent, Councilman Reed, she noted his stiff demeanor. He had long been a proponent of budget cuts, placing profit and efficiency above the community's heartbeat living within the library's walls. For him, the decision had always been about numbers; for her, it was deeply personal, intertwined with the fabric of who she was becoming. Marfa began her address, her voice resonant yet tinged with tension. "I stand before you not just as a librarian, but as a member of this community invested in its cultural survival," she declared, each word deliberately chosen to confront Reed's ideologies. She remembered the sleepless nights she had spent poring over proposals, crafting arguments that could sway council members to see the library not as a luxury but a necessity, a sanctuary for growth and learning. It was in the middle of her carefully articulated speech that the whispers of doubt threatened to creep in again. Would her arguments hold weight against the cold logic of financial spreadsheets? But as she spoke of the library's potential to inspire future generations, Marfa sensed her passion imbue her words with undeniable strength. A library is not merely a repository of books, but a vibrant hub for knowledge and creativity. Investing in our library means investing in our future. It means nurturing the very roots of this community, Marfa stated, projecting clarity amidst uncertainty. A flicker of resolute belief ignited within her as she witnessed nods of agreement from some council members. Marfa countered Reed's criticisms, her heart racing as she placed her hand upon the podium, grounding herself. In tactful rebuttals, she peeled back layers of skepticism, revealing the library's significance through social stories, local anecdotes, and public support. The tide was shifting, she could feel it. Yet, as she prepared to conclude, Reed hurled a veiled accusation questioning her motives, implying that her dreams were a facade for personal gain. It was a calculated move meant to instigate a defensive response. For a moment, Marfa felt like a deer caught in headlights. She grappled with the two options swirling in her mind, humiliation through dismissal or rising above it. Choosing the latter, she forged a connection instead. I do not seek glory or rewards. My goal is simple, to enrich our shared experiences. I understand the need for fiscal responsibility, I too am a steward of our community's resources. But to cut the library's funding is to neglect a fundamental aspect of our humanity. As the echoes of her plea settled in the chamber, she caught the gaze of Oliver from the audience. His unwavering support bolstered her confidence, intertwining with her own growing sense of empowerment. She was rediscovering her purpose but also unraveling a personal strength she hadn't known was buried within. When the deliberation began, Marfa felt a blend of anticipation and fear. The room buzzed with discussions, yet her heart raced with a different pulse, one that nurtured courage rather than crumbling under opposition. Her very future intertwined with that of the library. It dawned on her, she was not just fighting for a building, she was forging her identity. As the votes were being cast, she understood this moment was just the beginning. What if she didn't just stand in opposition to Reed, but transformed this challenge into an opportunity for dialogue? This realization shifted her perspective entirely, revealing a path of negotiation and collaboration. With the council's decision hanging in suspense, Marfa's resolve silently deepened. She needed a strategy meant to encompass not just survival but a true transformation of how they interacted with their storied institution. It was then, as she prepared to navigate the aftermath of whatever decision the council made, she realized her fight was not only for the library's survival but also for her own self-discovery. The next chapter was about to unfold, and she would have to choose whether to embrace her new role in ways she had not previously considered. And in that moment, an unsettling question arose: what if the next steps would require a partnership with her greatest adversary? Marfa stepped out of the council chamber, heart pounding, the echo of their deliberations dancing in her mind like echoes of distant thunder. The atmosphere outside felt fresh yet cutting, mirroring her chaotic emotions. She had taken a leap into the unknown, challenging her own limits, and now the consequences were yet to take shape. As she wandered past the library's facade, its tall windows glimmering in the afternoon sun, she thought of all it represented. It was more than a structure made of brick and mortar, it was a testament to knowledge, dreams, and community resilience. Each whisper of wind seemed to carry her doubts with it, but beneath that layer of uncertainty lay a flicker of determination. This was a pivotal moment not just for the library, but for her. The conversations buzzing in her head gradually shifted to strategies. Teaming up with Reed felt like a betrayal to the passion that fueled her fight. Yet, she recognized that forming a partnership could open doors she hadn't previously considered. It was a gamble, one that required calculation and careful navigation. The thought alone made her stomach churn. Reaching for her phone, Marfa opened her notes app, her ideas forming like distant constellations in a dark sky. She penned down action items, reminding herself not to lose sight of her core values. What do I stand for? She typed, forcing herself to examine the boundaries she'd drawn around her goals. Collaboration felt like surrender, yet it could lead to breakthroughs, the very essence of what she believed libraries to be. Marfa's thoughts drifted back to Oliver, his unwavering support serving as a foundation of encouragement. Perhaps he could help her unpack this internal struggle. She shot him a message, inviting him for coffee at their favorite cafe, a place that always held comfortable warmth amidst swirling uncertainty. As her fingers hovered over the screen, she hesitated. Would he understand her tumultuous thoughts about collaborating with Reed? The cafe buzzed with the chatter of patrons as she slid into a booth, tapping her fingers nervously on the table until Oliver arrived. The moment she saw him, her anxiety lessened. He wore a welcoming smile, the kind that felt like a refuge amid turmoil. "What's on your mind?" he asked as he took a seat, concern highlighting his features. Marfa dove into the council meeting, her strategy emerging as a tangled web of emotions. I don't know if I should consider working with Reed. It feels wrong, she admitted, looking down at her hands. But what if it opens avenues for us? What if we could actually make meaningful change? Oliver leaned in, his eyes narrowing slightly, probing. Change doesn't have to come solely from confrontation. Sometimes it's more strategic to play the long game. Just be careful not to lose sight of why you started this fight. Marfa considered his words, realizing perhaps that the emotional burden she carried was not just about the library but also her identity. The deeper she examined this partnership idea, the more she saw its potential to challenge her growth. Would she forge ahead in defiance or step into uncharted waters alongside someone who embodied everything she opposed? As they spoke, Marfa's conviction solidified further. What if I take Reed's criticisms and turn them into constructive dialogues rather than confrontations? What if I show him that the library can thrive with collaboration rather than competition? Oliver nodded appreciatively, but concern still flickered behind his eyes. Tread carefully, Marfa. It's easy to succumb to someone else's vision if you let your guard down. Emerging from their discussion, Marfa felt a renewed sense of agency. She would confront this misalignment between her values and the necessity of collaboration with Reed. Yet, there was still the looming shadow of uncertainty as she returned home. Marfa realized this wasn't just about libraries or budgets, this journey was about redefining the very essence of her leadership. With a notebook full of strategies and an ambivalent resolution brewing inside her, she closed her eyes to sleep. Would facing Reed with openness strengthen her own resolve? Or would she find herself drowning in the very compromises she sought to avoid? The night deepened, filled with questions that expanded like dark clouds on the horizon, hinting at the storm she was about to navigate. What strategy would she implement next, and at what cost? Dawn broke uncertain and gray, the light filtering through Marfa's curtains like cautious whispers. The remnants of last night's discussions replayed in her mind, caught in an intermingled web of possibility and anxiety. Facing Reed felt inevitable, but the contours of that confrontation loomed larger, both a challenge and an opportunity for transformation. She moved through her morning routine mechanically, each task a prelude to the crucial encounter ahead. As she brewed her coffee, the familiar aroma reminded her of Oliver's words, urging caution, and yet some deep-seated part of her craved the confrontation. Would she feel empowered by taking the risks she had long avoided, or would she stumble into the chasm of compromise? Fueled by caffeine and determination, she sat with her notebook, the pages blank yet heavy with potential. She revisited her action items, reshaping her thoughts into strategies that could either build bridges or erect walls. Open dialogue, she wrote. Present a united front, then challenge. Show instead of tell. With each line, she mapped out a course she had never considered, a tactical balance of her vision, adapted for collaborative engagement. Time blurred as she drafted emails to staff members and supporters, her fingers flying over the keyboard. She resolved to rally their insights and strengthen her resolve. Anna, the children's librarian, with her infectious passion and innovative ideas, seemed particularly aligned with Marfa's mission. If she could cultivate a coalition grounded in shared values, she might navigate the upcoming meeting with Reed not merely as a solo act of dissent but as a multifaceted approach to leadership. Yet even as she constructed the narrative, a nagging doubt clutched at her. Was she diluting her message by seeking common ground? As the minutes ticked towards the meeting, fear prickled her skin. Marfa's heart raced, an erratic drumbeat reminding her that vulnerability can breed strength. She arrived at the library early, the building standing resolutely as if it too were preparing for the day's challenges. The sight of it filled her with resolve, then doubt. Would Reed appreciate its essence, or would he see it merely as a battleground for resources? As the clock inched towards their scheduled meeting, she entered the conference room, nerves bubbling beneath her calm exterior. Reed was already there, his demeanor poised, exuding an air of absolute confidence that was as intimidating as it was inspiring. "Marfa, good to see you," he said, his tone smooth. "I'm eager to discuss our ideas." Her eyes searched his face, looking for sincerity, an ally lurking behind the corporate mask. "I've been considering the bigger picture." She laid out her vision, channeling Oliver's advice into her words. "The library isn't just about books, it's about community engagement, growth, and innovation. We can work together to address our budget challenges." Reed listened, his expression unreadable. As Marfa spoke, she felt the tremor of her earlier doubts, but this time, it flickered less like a warning and more like a spotlight on her determination. Their dialogue sparked, evolving from mere negotiations to constructive exchanges, a back and forth of ideas rather than conflict. However, just as confidence began to settle in, Reed turned the conversation to uncharted territory. "But do you really think this collaboration can serve what both sides need? What will you be willing to give up?" Marfa's stomach churned as the invasive question struck deeper than intended. Would she indeed have to sacrifice her vision or principles for partnership? The room suddenly felt colder, the air thick with implications. She steadied herself. Could she redefine what giving up meant, transform it from loss to strategic alteration? Just then, the realization struck her. This was her moment to not only negotiate collaboration but also reclaim her essence of leadership. Fingers trembling slightly, she looked straight into Reed's eyes. "What I'm here to ensure is that my vision remains intact, and in doing so, I want to discover how that vision can expand, rather than diminish, within collaboration." The tension between them shifted, and as they navigated this complex exchange, the prospect of mutual growth shimmered amidst uncertainty. Marfa felt the moment stretch as clarity unfolded. Could her commitment spark the change she desperately sought? But with every invigorating option, the looming shadow of doubt followed closely. What truly lay at the intersection of her ambitions and their negotiation? Would this collaboration foster her growth, or was she merely setting herself up for another round of compromise? With the stakes higher and her resolve tested, Marfa took a deep breath. The chance for transformation awaited, even as the future held haunting questions. The encounter with Reed was just the beginning. What would it take to navigate this precarious balance between ambition and collaboration, and who would emerge as true allies in her quest? The conversation hung in the air like an unsolved riddle, each pause amplifying the gravity of the decisions looming on their horizon. Reed's calm scrutiny made Marfa acutely aware of the sincerity she needed to exude. She wasn't here merely to defend her vision, she was poised to expand it, refining her narrative into something vivid and compelling. Yet conceiving that clarity proved ever more elusive. "Your passion for the library is clear," he finally said, his tone shifting slightly as if intrigued rather than dismissive. "But passion alone doesn't fill gaps in budgets, Marfa. What we need is a practical agreement." The undercurrent of challenge in his voice tugged at her insecurities. True, the library's financial strain and incessant, gnawing anxiety could not be ignored. A pragmatic response was essential, yet in her heart, Marfa feared that practicalities might cheapen her vision. She grappled with the notion of compromise. Was it a path to collaboration or an insidious slide into defeat? "I understand practicality," she replied, gripping the edge of the table, feeling its cool surface infuse a measure of steadiness into her uncertain thoughts. "But without vision, practicality turns into aimlessness." The words tumbled out, unexpected yet gravely needed. She felt emboldened, fierce even, standing in defense of her purpose. Reed studied her, a flicker of admiration crossing his features before he masked it with a businesslike neutrality. "Let us explore how we can align that vision with real-world applications. After all, the community deserves both ambition and action." The resounding sail of words encouraged Marfa. Maybe there was a path that wouldn't require her to sell herself short. The thought shattered the anxiety weighing on her shoulders, igniting a latent energy. They could recraft her vision together if only she could guide Reed to embrace its depth rather than stifle its breadth. "An idea," she said carefully, letting the impulse take her. "What if we spearhead a program that brings in both funding and visibility? Something that solidifies the library's role as a community nexus." She felt herself warming to the possibility, each word on the tip of her tongue igniting a fervor that wove through her resolve. Reed's brow furrowed, only slightly, but it signaled he was listening intently. "And exactly what do you propose?" She took a breath, mentally returning to her notes. "We could host workshops that utilize the talents within our community: writing, arts, even business skills. Involving local experts will draw new patrons and donors alike. Each factor aligned into a coherent strategy, relaying that vision could manifest into tangible outcomes." "Interesting," Reed remarked, leaning back in his chair, fingers steepled, yet Marfa couldn't ignore the note of skepticism hidden behind his interest. "But what involvement will you need from us, and what risk are we taking if this isn't successful?" Marfa's pulse quickened. The risks were real, yet she sensed a different kind of momentum blossoming, an opportunity to unfurl her concept into something greater. "We can start small," she proposed tenaciously, letting each word resonate. "Trial workshops that require minimal initial investment. If they don't succeed, we simply reassess. If they do, we strengthen that bond with the community." A silence enveloped them again, deeper this time, laden with heavier implications. Reed's consideration signified engagement. For the first time, Marfa caught a glimpse of the possibility that he might be willing to shift the balance, too. Yet even as hope sparked, another part of her psyche screeched with caution. What if Reed purchased her ideas but never aimed to see them bear fruit? Each proposal she laid before him also laid bare her vulnerabilities, exposing dreams fragile enough for even a quick dismissal to shatter. "Marfa," Reed posed, his voice smooth yet probing as always. "Think carefully about what you're willing to stake. Strategy requires not just vision, but also sacrifice." Sacrifice. The word echoed ominously in her mind. What would remain of her identity if she lost sight of her original vision for the allure of success? There in the tension of the air, clarity collided with uncertainty. "I won't sacrifice the integrity of the library, nor will I draw back from my aspirations. But I will adapt to bring the vision to life," she finally declared, her tone unwavering. "Will you truly see this as a partnership or merely an obligation?" The question lingered in the room, ready to tip the scales of their growing alliance. Transformer or torn? Would she dismantle the fragments of her dream for a surface-level deal? With each passing second, the stakes intensified. They stood on the brink of something profound, yet persona and ambition hung in precarious balance. Marfa's heart thudded as Reed's gaze sharpened into focus, holding something just beyond reach. "We'll need to discuss this further," he replied, his words steeped in contemplative intensity. In that moment of suspended uncertainty, Marfa realized the path ahead would most certainly be fraught with challenges and even more daunting revelations. Who would truly stand beside her in this uncertain quest for growth, and at what cost would she transform her dreams into reality? Marfa stepped out of the office, the heavy door thudding shut behind her. The muted hum of the library enveloped her in an atmosphere that felt both familiar and foreign. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, mirroring the chaotic whirl of thoughts in her mind. Her fingers traced the spines of the books that lined the shelves, yet even the comforting textures seemed distant in the wake of her conversation with Reed. Determination gnawed at her insides, carving out a space for new thoughts. She needed to discover deeper layers of herself, not just as a librarian, but as a visionary, a leader who could bridge aspiration with action. The stakes felt higher than ever, every potential failure looming, threatening to shatter her dreams of revitalizing the library. A flicker of anxiety gave way to nascent determination. Finding a small table in an empty corner, Marfa sat down and pulled out her notebook. A blank page stared back at her. Her thoughts needed structure, a plan to propel her nascent ideas into reality. She had to assess what she was willing to risk: time, energy, perhaps even her reputation. After all, this wasn't merely about the library's future, it was about her own evolution. She began to jot down ideas, sketches of workshops and potential community partnerships that glimmered with promise. Each concept rekindled hope and ignited a sense of purpose with every stroke of her pen. Her vision unfurled before her, reinvigorating the depths of her aspirations. Yet as she scribbled away, doubt crept in, whispering questions that resonated painfully in her mind. Would the community welcome her ideas? What if they failed to see the library's potential? Undeterred, she pressed on. This was a step into uncharted territory, but it was one she had to take. As night fell, Marfa's thoughts turned to Reed's warning about sacrifice. Thinking back, she realized that the true cost might not lie solely in their potential partnership but rather in how she viewed her own ambitions. Would she venture forward with just hope? Or would she also harness the criticism she'd faced before, using it as fuel for her resolve? Reed had been a mirror reflecting both her potential and her vulnerabilities, challenging her perspective. Even if he was skeptical, she sensed that there was an underlying respect that could be nurtured into collaboration or dashed against doubt. The environment surrounding the library felt different in the evening's calm. Shadows elongated, flickering across the walls. Marfa inhaled deeply, savoring the stillness that offered a moment of clarity. She pulled a pocket-sized mirror from her bag. Looking at her own reflection, she summoned the strength within her, the very essence of her vision that she fought to defend. "I won't falter," she whispered, almost as a pledge. The challenges ahead were no less daunting, but she was now resolute. Her heart raced as she envisioned the workshops and the faces of those who might benefit from her vision. Yet, within her heart beat the question of true partnership echoing once more. How would she navigate that delicate balance between dream and practical application? Marfa felt a shift deep within her. This was not just about creating something tangible, it was a lesson in defiance against self-doubt. This was about her transformation, about evolving into someone capable of leading. Inspired, she began formulating a timeline, outlining initial steps she could take to garner support from the community, even before the workshops commenced. The following day, her first course of action would be to reach out to local experts, gathering their input, inviting them into the unfolding narrative. If she could illuminate the value of the library as a central hub of learning and expression, well, that was a vision worth fighting for. As she prepared to leave the table, the weight of the journey ahead cloaked her with intensity. But for the first time, fear transformed into possibility and resolve. The moment felt charged with anticipation. Driven by both her ambition and curiosity, Marfa stepped outside, ready to embrace the unpredictable road ahead. And then, as she crossed the threshold into the vibrant evening, an unexpected thought struck her with clarity: what would it take to turn her dreams into actions? In the shadowy confines of the library, her adventure had only just begun. And when Reed returned with his insights, how would their discussion unfold? Would it solidify a partnership or fracture her vision altogether? The potential for growth and turbulence awaited her in those conversations. Marfa awoke early the next morning, the light filtering through her window shedding a soft glow that invigorated her with a sense of urgency. Memories of last night's resolve still echoed in her mind, nudging her toward action rather than retreat. She brewed coffee, the rich aroma enveloping her as an echo of possibility lingered in the air. Today marked the beginning of her bold initiatives, and her heart raced with anticipation, tethered to the ambition she had carefully crafted. With her notebook in hand, Marfa prepared her outreach strategy. She meticulously researched local experts and community organizations, her fingers dancing over the keyboard as she sought those whose passions aligned with her vision for the library. Each name on her list represented potential paths towards collaboration. Each email she envisioned could be a gateway to invaluable insight. She envisioned the library as a beacon, pulsing with creativity rather than echoing silence, but hovering behind that excitement was fear. Would they see her as a leader? Or just a librarian? The dichotomy of her identity pressed against her as she drafted each message, the seconds stretching like minutes. She couldn't allow doubt to incapacitate her. She needed to be strategic and assertive, presenting herself not just as a professional but as an agent of change. The first email she sent felt electric, a simple introduction wrapped in a confident articulation of her vision. With each keystroke, Marfa felt her old insecurities retreat. By the time she clicked send, a new version of herself emerged. Empowered, she could already see the first glimmers of a network forming, even from the small actions of this day. Yet, as the hours passed without immediate replies, doubt crept back in, spinning questions that made her second-guess her ambition. Were her ideas too grand for the library? Was she making a fool of herself? It cultivated a leader's paradox, the need for reassurance while marching into uncharted waters. She recognized this hesitation as a challenge she had to face head-on. She remembered the moment with Reed. Tears of frustration had once been shared from the prospect of failure, yet he ignited a spark within her that would not extinguish. No sooner had she sank into this contemplative spiral when her phone buzzed. It was a notification for a new email. Heart drumming, she opened it expecting the worst but found a local educational consultant showing interest in her ideas. The message invited a meeting, stating they looked forward to discussing ways to enhance community engagement at the library. Inhalation of breath was barely permissible, exhilaration bloomed within her, feeling a fresh wave of validation, she refocused. This was just the beginning, yet the small win ignited a flame. She leaned into the discomfort, pushing against the restrictions of her former self. If this one meeting could materialize, perhaps she could arrange many more. Marfa conjured the names from her list, each representing a different thread she could weave into a vibrant and cohesive vision. Over the coming week, she set out to schedule more meetings, refining her approach as she learned from each interaction. Each response, whether enthusiastic or indifferent, served as feedback to hone her proposal, sharpening her trajectory toward what she knew the library could become. As she immersed herself in this endeavor, she unearthed a hidden competence within her, the ability to negotiate, listen, and adapt, often drawing from her previous experiences in the library's quieter environment. What started as a spark was now a flame. She was transforming herself on this journey not merely as a librarian but as a catalyst for change. Yet, as she faced the exhilarating challenges of outreach, an unsettling thought lingered: what if she stumbled? The looming imperfections of human interaction posed risks she couldn't ignore. Would she face direct criticism for her enthusiasm? Would any failure stigmatize her emerging leadership? Determination sharpened, she found solace knowing that growth often stemmed from unbridled attempts, from triumphs as well as setbacks. She channeled that thought into a mantra, savoring the nuance at the edge of her developing identity. As evening settled in and she reviewed her schedule for tomorrow, a familiar whisper returned: what if all this culminated in something remarkable, or would it unravel into chaos? Reed's skepticism floated into her consciousness, reminding her that the real test awaited beyond her small wins. With her head swimming with possibilities and doubts, Marfa finally realized that her journey was only beginning. What awaited her at those meetings? The promise of partnership or the threat of disillusionment? As she prepared to sleep, the excitement mingled with trepidation, leaving her restless with anticipation. It was time to confront the truth behind the facade of her dreams. Soon, the first meeting would arrive, and with it, the stakes would be higher than she could imagine. Marfa Sobakina stood before the library, its facade glowing in the sunset hues, emblematic of transformation. She felt as if she had shed layers of doubt, emerging into a realm vibrantly colored by possibility. The community meeting she had envisioned weeks ago was now a reality, and her heart raced with anticipation. This was her moment to not merely echo the strength of stories within those walls but to harness the community's collective energy for revival. Amidst the gathering crowd, each familiar face reflected shared histories: young mothers, local artists, school children. They remembered the warmth of the library and the magic of stories. Marfa positioned herself at the front, feeling as though she had transcended her past anxieties as she tapped into the pulse of the community. Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. Together, we stand at a critical juncture not just for the library, but for our shared legacy, she began, her voice steady and passionate. The ambience buzzed with expectation. Responding to her own growth, she spoke with newfound assurance, articulating her vision for revitalization through actionable programs, workshops, book readings, and art installations. As she highlighted specific local talents who had agreed to collaborate, the energy in the room shifted. It crystallized from skepticism to budding enthusiasm. We cannot afford to let our library fade into obscurity, Marfa stated, locking eyes with Oliver, who had come to support her. His encouraging nod reinforced her conviction. She could feel the tide turning as she encouraged community involvement through open discussions. We are the stewards of this institution. We can bring it back to life, together, she asserted, her resolve solidifying with each word. She could sense the collective hunger for connection, that same craving she had initially feared might be lost. This was not just a conversation, it was an awakening. As questions flowed, she navigated challenges calmly, citing other successful community projects as models for implementation, converting resistance into collaboration through strategic dialogue. Her message grew clearer: the library was not only a repository of books but a vibrant hub for creative growth. The crowd buzzed, igniting the spirit of engagement that pulsed through the fabric of the community. Days later, a wave of responses flooded in. Commitments to the workshops and community events began rolling in, paying homage to her transformed perspective as a leader. Marfa realized her previous fear of failure had evolved into a platform for true leadership that encompassed risk and vulnerability. The realization cemented a sense of achievement within her. She had proven her capability to inspire and mobilize her community beyond her initial expectations. Recognized for her efforts, Marfa soon received a commendation from the local council, acknowledging her initiative and spirit in rejuvenating the library. This moment stood as a testament to her journey, a symbolic victory over despair through palpable transformation. At an award ceremony, she stood taller than ever as she accepted the recognition. There was no erasure of the struggles she had faced, but they became sources of strength rather than flaws. The applause that filled the room surged within her as a palpable wave of validation. She felt affirmed, wholly in command of her place in the community. Months later, the library thrived with programs that drew in diverse crowds, a renaissance allowing creativity to flow. Marfa smiled as she watched the children rummaging through stacks of books, the chatter of community members intermingling in the air. It felt like home, a testament that change rooted in resilience could flourish when supported by a united vision. The transformation stretched beyond the library. Marfa engaged with different projects in the town, initiating new dialogues where voices previously stifled could be heard. The evolution extended to her personal life as she embraced her role as a leader, seeking partnerships where her input was valued and respected, an environment where her aspirations could blossom without compromise. In the end, Marfa Sobakina had not merely saved a library, she had rediscovered herself. Empowered by clarity of purpose, she had forged an identity built on collaboration, commitment, and courage. As she gazed across the library's vibrant halls, she reflected on how each step of this journey solidified who she had become, a recognized figure driving growth, thriving amid challenges, and inspiring others to embrace the transformative power of stories. Now, I urge you, subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm, it genuinely makes a difference. Comment your reactions and theories about the ending. Your insights matter. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion, because this is your moment to show support. Don't wait even one more second to share. True fans of personal overcoming stories know the importance of acting now.